Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our pre-conference, which is preceding the ministerial conference on borderless e-government services. There is a long tradition started by our Swedish partners already 6 years ago, that one day before the ministerial conference, which is a very big event but closed and only official governmental delegations are attending this ministerial conference. So one day before, there is a pre-conference which is free, which is open, and which is where everybody is welcome. These pre-conferences are usually devoted to discuss the most challenging issues which are in this area of e-everything, because now everything is e, preceded by this e letter. So this year we decided to devote this pre-conference to innovation for e-participation. We have two very important words in the title of this pre-conference. First, innovation, which is the only way how European countries can win this global competition in the world. We can win only via innovation. And second word is e-participation. Our success will depend how many people, businesses and offices will join e-society and the economy. There is a way how we can improve our economy, how we can improve the quality of life in Europe in future. So usually e-participation concerns individuals, but there is a lot of different conferences which are devoted particularly to this problem. We decided to understand this e-participation as e-participation in small and medium-sized businesses and e-participation of offices, especially from different rural countries, lands and places and so on. Well, because so it is closely related on one side to this most vibrant and decisive part of our administration of business, which creates most of innovative workplaces, which can be a stimulator or can stop development of economy. I'm talking about offices and so on. So this conference is shaped in such a way that we have two regular sessions, we have two panel sessions, and we have a keynote speech which will be at the very beginning. And so it is very harmoniously constructed. The organizers of these pre-conferences, there are three institutions. I start with hosting institution, which is Poznań University of Economics, chaired by Rector Marian Gorynia, Professor Marian Gorynia. Then by the Swedish agency Vinnova, very well known for stimulating innovation, which is represented here by Mrs. Anne-Marie Fineman, and PARP, which is a Polish agency also related with stimulation of economic growth and innovation in Poland, which is represented here by CEO Bożena Lublińska-Kasprzak. So three institutions, one scientific and two governmental organizations responsible for pushing our business, our administration and our people, well, to e-participate in future. I like to invite now our rector, Professor Marian Gorynia, to welcome address. Yes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a special honor to open the pre-conference to the 6th European Ministerial e-Government Conference, one of the largest and biggest EU events in Poland during the 6 months period of Polish presidency, which will start tomorrow. I'm glad that such an important event is being held at the Poznań University of Economics. The conference has been organized by the Department of Information Technology of our university. Special thanks to Professor Wojciech Celary, thanks to whom the conference has occurred. I do highly appreciate your contribution in this event. The pre-conference is also jointly organized by Vinnova from Sweden and Polish Agency for Enterprise Development, of course, from Poland. With their strong support, it has become possible to invite international experts from many countries all over the world. Please accept my great respect and gratitude. I would like to express my warmest welcome aboard the Poznań University of Economics to all the eminent guests who have accepted the invitation to participate in this event. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes without saying that innovation for e-participation has become part of our business daily lives. The pre-conference aims to demonstrate many signs and activities showing that Europe is rapidly becoming mature as in e-society. However, to ensure a widespread uptake and high service quality level for all, there are still many challenges that have to be a subject of advanced multidisciplinary research. The lectures are going to point out how all these areas will become easier and easier to handle pretty soon. Besides, the sheer scope of these problems make them seem to be worth analyzing. I must say, I am deeply concerned especially with the areas strictly connected with showing the results of important European e-government research in generating and implementing e-visions and e-solutions, as well as the possibilities to build new strategies upon current results. I do hope that during these sessions and debates there will be an opportunity for heated, interesting international discussions. I wish you a successful and very fruitful meeting. Thank you very much.
I now invite Mrs. Anne-Marie Fineman to say her address. Do you like?
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Vinnova, the Swedish Innovation Agency, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the pre-conference to the 6th European Ministerial e-Government Conference. As co-organizers of this, the third pre-conference, we are delighted to contribute to the upholding of the tradition that was started in Lisbon in 2007, continued in Malmö in 2009, and is now practically established as we meet here in Poznan for the third time. The topic of today's conference, Innovation for e-Participation, is one of very high significance and one that presents both opportunities and challenges. And I very much look forward to learning more on how these issues, challenges and opportunities are addressed in the sessions today. I would like to express our gratitude and appreciation to Professor Celary and his team for all of their efforts and their hard work to get this conference organized. I would also like to thank the university for their assistance and for providing such a fantastic venue. And also our Polish sister organization, PARP, for fruitful cooperation to make this event happen. And with that, I would like to wish everyone a very productive and enjoyable day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I invite Mrs. Bożena Lublińska-Kasprzak to welcome address on behalf of PARP.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here with you today at the opening of this conference on innovation for e-participation, which will lead us directly to the 6th European Ministerial e-Governmental Conference. I believe this is a very important moment to have such a conference, because from one side we live in times where innovation is a must for the businesses and for the economy and for the governments. And we are living in a world where innovation is all over us, and it is important now to define what is really innovative and what is not, and especially as it concerns new economic sectors like e-commerce. We should learn how to build the culture of innovation in order to support development of economy in the most efficient way. On the other side, in the context of economic crisis reality, which we are living now in, e-commerce is presenting the opposite tendencies. It develops intensively. Analysis shows that in Poland, e-business will grow in the course of next 5 years 2-3 times faster than gross domestic product, reaching the value of 77 billion zlotys. It still increases its potential, and therefore it might be a perfect example of how to act in present times. So such conference is a really important event and important place to discuss that. As the public institution, Polish Agency for Enterprise Development, which is supporting both businesses and innovation, we are now here in a very important stage. We are now in the process of evaluating our activity financed from the structural funds budget 2007-2013, and we are preparing for the next programming period, next budget after 2013. So now we are in the process of discussing how and what to support, especially in the area of e-businesses after 2013. So such a conference is also very important place. Conclusions and recommendations from the conference, I hope we will use in our programming discussion. Again, I welcome you to this conference in Poland. I believe that it will be fruitful in conclusions and recommendation. I'd like to thank very much Professor Sellery and the university for organizing the conference, and our colleague from Swedish Vinnova agency. It was a great pleasure to cooperate with you, and great pleasure and opportunity for the agency to organize such a conference. And our foreign guests, I wish a pleasant stay in Poland. And thank you.
Thank you very much for this welcome addresses. We will now immediately go to our keynote speech. So I propose that you take place in front of the screen, which will be much more comfortable. Our speaker is, maybe before I present our speaker, I like to welcome all the attendees of this conference who are watching us via internet. This pre-conference is transmitted online. And it appears on a special portal managed by PARP, which is called We Support Electronic Business. It is also transmitted directly to the pages of this conference, the usual pages of this pre-conference. So it is my great pleasure to welcome and present our keynote speaker, who is Mrs. Julia Glidden. Mrs. Julia Glidden is a managing director of 21st Century Consultancy, and she completed her PhD in international relations at Oxford University and has extensive experience working with public administrations across Europe to improve service delivery. Dr. Glidden is an internationally recognized expert in e-government. She has authored numerous articles on the subjects, including a Council of Europe-sponsored volume on e-participation, precisely the title of our conference. In 2010, Dr. Glidden worked with the Flemish e-government authority to draft the Citadel Statement, a pan-European agenda for local e-government that represented the views of over 120 participants from 18 countries across Europe, including 64 organizations representing over 200 cities on 5 continents. Building on this initiative, Dr. Glidden helped to found Citadel on the Move, a flagship project of the European Commission aiming to combine open access data and mobile application tools to create smart, innovative, citizen-generated services that can be used in different European cities. Dr. Glidden is a senior research fellow at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, a guest lecturer at the European Institute of Public Administration in Maastricht, a member of the Scientific Committee for the Global Forum. In addition, Julia has been retained by the European Commission as an official EU project evaluator and is regularly invited to participate in and chair juries for e-government competitions. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's indeed a real honor to be here today, particularly to talk about a subject that many of you that know me know is very dear to my heart and indeed embedded in my career. I began my career 10 years ago in the dot-com era, which seems a far, far time away from today's fiscally constrained era, but the era in which money was being thrown at dot-coms and E was going to solve everything. And I just stumbled into the world's first internet voting experiment in Arizona. And that brought me into the field of e-participation before the word was really ever even, widely known or widely used. And at that time, however, participation and ICT and democracy were all about policy shaping, all about the democratic decision-making process. But what I want to talk to you about today, and I have to pay deference to Professor Sellery because I shamelessly stole his metaphor of turtles and gazelles for this speech, is the transition that we've seen in the use of the term e-participation, particularly in public currency, from the focus 10 years ago on engaging citizens in the democratic process, where I do really confidently recall, because I was the PR person that placed the articles there, the Financial Times, USA Today, New York Times, the Asahi Shimbun paper in Japan talking about how democratic processes as we know them would be revolutionized by the introduction of e-voting and online tools. And we saw a whole host of very commendable projects that were sponsored around the world through agencies like Renova, as well as through the European Commission in particular, to try to drive and embed e-participation. It is somebody that crafted a lot of these projects and worked on them. I can honestly say the single greatest barrier we've seen through the years was a lack of take-up from the politicians. It really wasn't a lack of take-up from the citizens. We saw a lot of willingness to pay lip service to e-participation, but not really wanting the processes disrupted. Not, representative democracy was always rolled out, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. I was never one to advocate we sit in our rooms after a dramatic event and vote whether or not to bomb X country or Y. But I was one who advocated that these tools presented new potentials for engaging citizens in policymaking. That at a political level was not fully embraced, and that will be a theme that I will come back to throughout the discussion. What we've seen instead is, in more recent years, a transition to a use of e-participation in terms of involving citizens and communities and SMEs in public service design, in the co-creation and co-design of public services. And what I want to talk to you about today is how that shift impacts what I am going to refer to as the public sector as the turtles, and no criticism meant to our colleagues here that work in the public sector. I think that they know better than anyone how hard it is to work in large organizations with hundreds of years of tradition and administrative processes and legal constraints and bureaucratic barriers. But, you know, the public sector is traditionally slow to change, slow to innovate, embedded in a very top-down culture. A top-down culture that, if we look historically, is because 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it had to be top-down. There was simply no other way for a public administration to oversee the vast amounts of services that it needs to provide to its citizenry without being top-down. But that model, as we know, is significantly challenged in an era in which technological developments have rapidly outpaced the ability of these organizations to come out of their shells and to embrace change. What does that mean in terms of the private sector? When I say the private sector as gazelles, I'm not always talking about some of the big cumbersome companies. I'm really talking about what many of us see as the hope for innovation and growth in the European Union and indeed around the world as we face such dire fiscal constraints, which is in SMEs, which are quick to innovate, quick to respond to change, often at the forefront of the development of those new products and services that can meet needs in a quick and rapid way. But their challenge is they don't understand government at all. I mean, they're often run by a bunch of kids. I mean, I used to be one. Unfortunately, I'm not anymore. But, you know, they're run by a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds who just, thank goodness, and by definition, can't understand the constraints that an administration has to work in. They can't understand the constraints that a large company has to work in, let alone government. They don't know how to access government. They don't know what government needs. At the same time, our SMEs need government. They need government to create the right policy context for their high impact growth. They need government to create the right fiscal environment. They need government to help foster the right skills that they need. So my thesis today is that we've got a gap. We've got a gap between one of the potential drivers of growth and better public service delivery and a new era of e-participation, which are our gazelles, our SMEs, our private sector enterprises, and our public administrators, our turtles that you know, plod along but get the job done and are always there and always reliable. My thesis is that one methodology that has gained a lot of currency in recent years, the Living Labs, is a potential bridge, a potential way to bridge the gap between high impact innovation and dynamism that we see in SMEs and the needs that our public sector has to deliver better and more efficient services with less and less resource, to meet ever increasing citizen demands for 24/7, fast, quick and easy access to services in an era in which there's less and less money and more pressure to do more and more with less and less. Living Labs is a hard topic to talk about because people are either very familiar with it or they've never heard of it at all. And so I end up either boring half the audience to death and leaving half the audience behind. So bear with me a little bit. But the term is not new. The Commission, the European Commission, first started funding Living Labs back in 1995. So if I could do a little experiment, could I just get a show of hands, people that are aware of the Living Lab movement and my experiment works. 50% of you have heard of Living Labs and 50% of you haven't. But nonetheless, the thinking is that it's a very effective mechanism to bridge that gap, to bring the public administrators together with the citizens and with the businesses that use the services that they deliver. And I use the analogy, it would be absolutely insane for Microsoft or Adobe, who's here with us today, to create a new product without testing it at all with the end users, without seeing what the market wanted, without understanding if it's what they needed, and certainly without seeing if it was usable in any way, shape, or form. It would be insane. There would be no way any large company would invest tens of millions of euros in R&D to put something untried and untested into the market. And yet if you think about it, that's been the traditional public sector service delivery model. It has been, as I said, for very understandable historical and institutional reasons, but that's been the traditional way we've done business. And with my private sector hat, I look at Living Labs as really no more than focus groups and user design testing sessions. You know, get citizens and get SMEs in a room with public administrators to see what it is they really want and need, to see what it is that's really out there that can be brought together to deliver services in new and more efficient ways. So I see it as a methodology that is a sort of public sector codification of something the private sector's been doing for a very long time, and yet that's not to underestimate how innovative and how unique this methodology actually is in terms of public sector design. It's a growing trend. As I said, it started in Europe in 1995, but it's very rapidly spread around the world. In Europe now, we see it focused a great deal and most effectively, in my opinion, on the smart city movement, although I'm sure there's others in the room that would say it's focused more effectively in other areas, and we can have a debate. But the smart city movement, I mean, I think you really can't watch a CNN hour without hearing some company say they've got smart energy, smart TVs, I heard this morning, smart this, smart that. So smart, depending on your perspective, is either the latest buzzword or it is a new way for us to deliver more efficient and more effective public administration. And what Living Labs is trying to do in that context is bring together innovators and citizens and SMEs and public administrators to create smarter and more efficient services. And the thinking, there are as many definitions of a smart city as there are companies that slap it on their products and on their services, but my sort of simplified definition is that it's an effort to take the Internet of Things and the new RFID-enabled technologies that let us get real-time information and wedding it with social media tools that let us have real-time dialogue and communication to digitize and interconnect city systems so that we can take data and transform it into information and that we can act on that information real-time and ultimately hopefully deliver better and more efficient and more effective public services. One of the projects I'm going to touch upon just very quickly, but it's in line with the theme Innovation for eParticipation and my talk about how to better bridge the gap between those innovative SMEs and the public sector is a project called EPIC, which aims to wed cloud computing with the Living Lab methodology in order to provide a scalable platform across Europe for SME innovation and high-impact growth initiatives to be able to have impact across Europe. Because one of the limitations we've seen in Living Labs so far is we'll find a great innovation that happens here in Poznan, Poland by an SME, and the city of Poznan may take it up, but there it stays. The Living Lab methodology has not yet found a way for that great parking application to be sold to Bucharest, to be used in Brussels, to be taken up in Edinburgh. The innovations have pretty much not been able to grow across Europe, so they stay localized and they lose their impact. And what EPIC is looking for is to see if, in using the cloud as a platform and in putting together a service catalog, we could create a app store, something like an app store for public service delivery, where the SMEs can put their innovations that they've created with the public sector on the cloud, and cities across Europe can access that. Very interesting in terms of the ranges of public services that this particular project is piloting, because one of them is energy monitoring in the home, which a year ago I had never heard of, putting energy monitors in citizens' homes so that they can keep track of how much energy they're consuming and how much carbon dioxide is being emitted. And at the same time, the City of Manchester will be able to use that information to amend and inform its own carbon reduction and energy efficiency policies. Now, I say I haven't heard about this until a year ago because this morning you can tell I've worked on too many European projects, because when I was half asleep, I half thought EPIC was being broadcast on CNN, because I heard an advertisement for, we've been working for the last 5 years on energy efficient monitoring tools in the home, and I looked up and the TVs are going off and citizens are looking at iPads to see how much they've used, and it was an ad for Intel. I didn't even catch the name of the company that was, fortunate enough to have Intel promoting them, but it was the same tool that a little SME called Hildebrand in Manchester has been working on during that same amount of time. It's being targeted at consumers, but the value of the Living Lab methodology and some of the projects the European Commission is funding is that perhaps through things like EPIC and the cloud, we can help the Hildebrand become the next Intel-based company and service for the public sector. We can help get those turtles and those gazelles to work together. Another innovative service that I think is really particularly cool, and as somebody who lives in a city, London, which is very overcrowded and has all kinds of issues around urban planning, is being formed by a SME in Issy-les-Moulineaux, which is outside Paris, the sort of ICT hub of France, as it likes to be known. And this is Navidas is the SME that is creating this tool, and it will allow the city to put its urban plans in rich media, 3D, interactive formats on the web. And citizens will be able to, using avatars and sort of like gaming tools, fly through the new developments and actually see if that building is going to take out all the light in one's back garden, and if the noise that's reflected is going to make the trains across the road, suddenly insufferable and as if they're going over your head, and be able to actually play with the computer game to see, well, you know what, maybe, and this is where the co-creation comes in, maybe if you had 11 stories instead of 12, this would happen, and maybe if you oriented the garden this way, there'd be more CO2 coming out. But again, some very interesting services and products and tools that SMEs are bringing to the market through the Living Lab methodology, because this isn't Navidas sitting alone thinking, I guess this is what Issy-les-Moulineaux needs, and this isn't Issy-les-Moulineaux saying this is what our citizens need. It's using this methodology of Living Labs to bring all of the constituents together to develop the types of products that are needed. Quickly outside Europe, one of the more interesting areas that I think Living Labs is taking off on is literally and actually in the Amazon. The father of Living Labs, Alvaro Olvidera from Eno, actually gave me a call once from a Living Lab in the Amazon, and I think it was one of the most interesting calls I've ever had, because when you work on projects, they sometimes seem unreal and distant and abstract, and to actually get a call from a Living Lab in the Amazon and have someone tell you about the sustainable energy work they're doing and bringing the community together with the private sector and government officials was profoundly rewarding. I don't think it will surprise anybody to know that Living Labs are also growing quite rapidly now in Asia, and particularly in China, the University of Beijing, the Beijing City Administration, and a whole host of new Living Labs, where the emphasis right now seems to be on mobile and taking really innovative applications from the SME and private sector in the mobile world and using it to increase efficiency of service delivery in China. But having sort of done this around the world journey and this celebration of all great things that are happening with Living Labs, of course the question really comes back to what does this all mean? I started the conversation by asking the question, can Living Labs serve as a link between the public and private sector for eParticipation, for using ICT to better engage stakeholders in more efficient public service design and delivery. And I think that through the examples, and not surprisingly that I've shown, we've answered the question that yes, it can, but what we haven't addressed is will it? Because that's really the $100 million question. If you recall, I began the conversation by telling you a little bit about my own journey from eParticipation, where it was going to change the world and change democratic processes as we know it, and giving you my own feedback and personal opinion that early celebration, despite legitimate concerns about the technology and voting and the ins and outs of where you did apply the technology and to what processes in the democratic process. It largely fell on flat ears. People pay lip service to it, and we hear a tremendous amount of talk from politicians around the world about consulting with citizens and listening to them. But we see very little evidence of impact, of ICT being used in new ways to profoundly impact the democratic and political process, the policy-making process in real and meaningful ways. Starting to see some evidence in the UK, almost, sometimes I think by accident than by design, and that's not to criticize what's happening in the UK. I think the UK is very much at the forefront of embedding e-participation into the working process of Parliament, but we had a very interesting situation recently where an e-petition system that 10 Downing Street admirably put online and has implemented and that Parliament has taken up, and if you have 100,000, I think it is, online signatures, a bill can be debated through Parliament, and that's phenomenal. But fortunately, unfortunately, the first bill that came up was whether or not Britain should stay in the European Union. And those of us that live in England know that that's a wonderful topic. We can debate it forever. Since I was a student in the 80s, it's been there, and it will probably be there as my little boy goes off to university in 20 years. But nonetheless, it created a dilemma, because you can argue from a representative democracy perspective, in an era of fiscal crisis when the very future of the euro and indeed the union is at stake, this might not be the best time for the British Parliament to be talking about pulling the plug, particularly in 24/7 news cycles and the markets reacting to everything that's going up and down. On the other hand, this is what citizens said using ICT tools they wanted to talk about. And the Prime Minister, rightly or wrongly, decided to have what was called a three-party whip, which meant vote against this measure at your peril, which is hardly democratic, very necessary in a parliamentary system. I'm not criticizing parliamentary democracy, but the message was very contradictory. On the one hand, 100,000 people managed to have an issue that was passionately embedded in many people's political psyches in Britain, debated before Parliament, and on the other hand, the traditional mechanisms of Parliament were used to ensure that that debate effectively went nowhere. So our question is, where are we going? Because if 4 or 5 years ago there was a shift away from really trying to embed ICT, e-participation, and in new workflows, in new ways of defining the democratic process, to create a new ICT infrastructure where we permanently embedded e-participation in the policy-making process, I would argue there was a decision or not that it was not to happen. There's been no permanence in embedding ICT, and in fact, in the democratic process, and in fact, there's been very little structured analysis, structured attempts to say, we're living in a revolutionary world of change. What do we need to do democratically to ensure that our processes keep pace with those changes, to ensure that our processes keep pace with citizen expectations, to ensure that we make the most opportunity of these processes in a way that protects the democratic process rather than threatens it. There's been a few projects that the Commission has funded that have tried to do so, one called Tell Me, one called Lexipation, a recent one, Partire, which is looking at legal processes and how you would change the legal processes underpinning the democratic process to make greater way for ICT, but they still remain pilots. And yet, while we talk, I began the discussion by saying e-participation in the policy-making democratic context is sort of lost currency at the political level. We've seen in Occupy Wall Street just last night, where the park was emptied, back to the Arab Spring, that it's never actually been more active. So much so that we're talking about e-revolution now, not just e-participation. So we have this sort of disconnect between what's happening with our processes at the national political level and what's actually happening in our streets, in our parks. I had the honor of being at Vinova's offices a few weeks back to see the great things that they're doing there. And my hotel was across the Occupy Wall Street encampment in Sweden. I mean, you really can't go almost anywhere in Europe now, and I'm sure the States as well, without confronting that. And that has been fueled by social media. And it is very much an e-participation process, and yet there seems to be this disconnect. So if I go back to my shamelessly stolen turtles and gazelles, and the theme of the conference and the speech, Innovation for E-Participation, and particularly looking at the private sector and SMEs and the capacity or the future of e-participation in a meaningful way for service design and delivery, my question is, in this era of increased pressure on governments, where they just simply cannot, with the current constraints, provide 100% effective services that people expect on their own, will we be able to embed, to use the Living Lab methodology as a platform for embedding a new ICT infrastructure, for creating those new workflows to enable real e-participation in the terms of co-production and co-design of service delivery? Or are we at risk of making the same mistakes where we may pay lip service to these methodologies and occasionally have some successes or some promising errors, some promising projects like energy participation, but it really doesn't go anywhere. We can feel good about ourselves that we're talking about it and we're here at a conference and we're talking about SMEs and innovation and e-participation, but nothing really happens. You know, are we entering an era of high impact growth, of e-innovation, where our SMEs and our citizens and our public administrators at a genuinely embedded institutional level create new ways of collaborating and working together and redesigning the public service mandate, designing and delivering those services for the 21st century that all of us as citizens want and need? Or will we look back on this period in 5 years as a lost opportunity, where instead of creating a new innovation model, we opened ourselves up to the same e-revolution pathway, where in 5 years' time, citizens are just alienated, despairing of government, with meeting pace with their demands, and potentially even working with the private sector to do things for themselves. Now, I don't want to leave on a wholly negative or challenging topic, because I'm happy to say that in the run-up to this conference, as in the run-up to Malmo, the European Commission itself used new ICT tools to launch a pan-European online dialogue called Have Your Say. And that dialogue focused on an issue that's increasingly important for all of us in terms of creating a single market in Europe and overcoming the fiscal constraints we're talking about, which is cross-border e-service delivery. So for 2 weeks, the Commission consulted with stakeholders across Europe on what they felt was needed. And I think I have to say, honestly, I didn't get the results until late last night, and Professor Sellery can tell you, I wrote the speech last week. But not surprisingly, the results talked a lot about social media. The first thing people said that was needed was e-identity, more services that could be delivered via e-identity, but also less government-provided e-identity, that we're using federated identities throughout social media tools like Twitter, like Facebook, like LinkedIn, and yet the government's asking us to create whole new identities that make it even more complicated for us to remember them and access our services. And so one of the things that our online forum, the European Commission's online forum, has said is that not only do we need more services where we can use our online identities, and you can see that that comes again from our expectation where we use our online identities in every other aspect of our life, but government needs to work with us to use the online identities we have created, not the online identities they've given to us. Related to this, on cross-border service delivery, the forum said that we need to update enterprise architecture for the public sector. Now, I'm not a techie, so I'm not even sure when I first read that, oh my God, what does that mean? How am I going to present this? But integrating Web 2.0 and social networks so that citizens can help citizens with their cross-border mobility issues. Again, very interesting, because if you go to the website, the Have Your Say website, the question wasn't framed, how do we use social media to create better cross-border delivery, or how do we use Living Labs and co-production principles to create cross-border delivery? It simply asked, what do we need to do to facilitate cross-border mobility? And the answers that, the top answers that came back were, we need to use the tools, the social media, the Web 2.0, the participatory tools, the drivers of innovation that already exist to facilitate cross-border mobility. And I found that particularly interesting. I found the idea of citizens using social media to create a help desk to help citizens move and work across Europe particularly interesting, and I can just end with one quick analogy of a first-hand example I've had of, I have a pan-European consultancy, and I have people that work for me from across Europe, and one particular woman would like to do some freelance work in the Czech Republic. She's Czech, and she's got a British national insurance number. To work in the Czech Republic and get paid, she needs a Czech national insurance number, but under the EU directive, she can't have two national insurance numbers, so she should be able to use her British national insurance number in the Czech Republic. I don't need to go on and on to tell you that 1 year later, 17 million phone calls in Czech and English is not possible. She's now, I guess, breaking the law or subverting the law by working with two national insurance numbers, but here's a citizen, a young kid, really talented, genuinely trying to pay her taxes, genuinely trying to be a good European, and can't figure out how to navigate the system. And imagine a world where social media would just let her go on to a kind of government website and get that help she needs, because the civil servants weren't able to provide that help. And you think about it, a civil servant in Vysočina in the Czech Republic, and a civil servant in Brent in London, they don't get their EU directive update manuals on how to process this stuff. It's hard to do. Imagine if we used that type of participatory tools that we use in everything else. If I want to fix my washing machine, I go on to, Ask Jeeves in a website and I figure out how to do it. These are the kinds of innovations we need to be thinking about if we really want to use e-participation to drive innovation, to drive growth, and to create a stronger Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions, so still stay here. We have a very, very interesting and very inspirative talk. Please. I invite people who like to ask questions to come and use this microphone. It facilitates our online transmission to the internet. So everybody who like ask question, please make a line behind and then do it one after another. Please. Please present yourself and then...
Do I have to wave to the camera somewhere? My name's Peter Brown. I work as an independent consultant in the US. I was interested by your last comment about the use of social media to try and resolve, taking your example of the issue of someone trying to conform to the law and finding it very difficult. However, it seems a lot of the situations, the law itself is in conflict. So no amount of social media, no amount of twittering or trying to find mashups that will help the candidate is going to solve that problem. So surely the issue of this well-founded, well-meaning sort of, what do you call it, sort of wisdom of crowds, bottom-up stuff, amounts to nothing if there isn't a legal basis and legal interoperability at the top level. And give another example, if a citizen in Germany wants to use a service in Spain, the German authorities may say you are not allowed to share certain personal data. And in Spain, they may say, well, if you want this service, you have to share this personal data. No amount of technical interoperability is going to solve that because the legal requirements are different. So how do you get across that sort of boundary?
I think you just summarized my speech better than me, so thank you very much. Because really the point I was trying to make is that we have the tools, we have methodologies like Living Lab, we have ICT tools, we have social media. But if you don't embed institutional change, if you don't have those tools alongside the changes in the processes, the procedures, the legal, organizational, and cultural foundations, it's for nothing. The danger, and the reason I did use the word e-revolution, is the danger is you get increased frustration because the way we lead our lives with instant access and instant ability to communicate and create and help each other will increasingly come up against an outdated legal, bureaucratic, organizational infrastructure. And I think that that is a recipe for frustration amongst all the other frustrations that citizens are facing in this current fiscal crisis that can be addressed and should be addressed. But I personally, and I'd love it if someone in the audience can tell me great initiatives that are doing it. And that's not to say the Commission isn't doing some fantastic work on interoperability. They genuinely are, but there's only so much the Commission can do if the very member states don't take up that interoperability work, and some are and some aren't. But the greater challenge actually is the legal challenge and the business process change and the cultural change challenges, and that I can't do anything but agree with you more.
Thank you, please.
Thank you, Julia. Brilliant speech as usual. Jeremy Millard from Danish Technological Institute. Talking about frustration, which you were just talking about, and the fact that it's difficult for governments to use social media and other new stuff, but the people on the streets are doing it. And looking at what's been happening recently in London on your doorstep, not the Occupy St Paul's, because that's also interesting.
I wish I lived on the doorstep of St Paul's.
But the riots back in the summer, okay, there's a lot of counterclaims going backwards and forwards. Facebook and Twitter and BlackBerry caused it, or they didn't cause it, or they were used by the police. What's your on-the-ground view of the role of these social media in that, both before, during, and after?
I'm not an expert and I can't claim to have studied it in depth, but, common sense tells you these are the most used tools in the world. You can't go to any corner of the world. And I spent a lot of time in South Africa, and even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, people carrying mobile phones. It's counterintuitive to think that what happened, unfortunately, and quite scarily last summer in London, and that was literally on my doorstep. I don't have the money to live near St. Paul's, but I do live in an area that has a lot of poverty and had some of the rioting nearby. It's common sense that the rioters would be using these tools. They use them. You don't wake up and say, I'm going to riot today, but I'm going to leave the thing I use for everything else in my life back home. I use it to talk to my mom, I use it to talk to my friends, I use it to go to the movies, I use it to decide where to go drinking, but hey, I don't think I'm going to use it to riot today. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. At the same time, I think the more interesting thing to look at, and I would like to know more about, is to what extent did the public authorities use the tools, and to what extent did they use them efficiently to counter what was happening? Because instinctively, I think it goes without saying that social media and mobile facilitated mass disruptions in London last summer, and I think that kind of shows my challenge, which is to what extent was civil society able to use the same tools to protect and provide and preserve order. Because I would bet that the rioters were more effective than the civil society, but that would just be my thesis. Admirable as it is that they did use it, and the UK is actually leading the way in embedding these tools.
Thank you, please.
Good morning, I'm Geert Mariels from the Flemish government. As a professional rioter since my student times, I don't even think the use of social media in the riots was so important. We used to distribute pamphlets by the hundreds. But what is important is how this media, the citizens themselves are using all the new technologies against all these old-fashioned things. Because throughout the history of mankind, innovation, democracy never came top-down. It was what you used very rightfully, e-revolution. People took what was coming to them. And we see, at least in my country, but I can imagine in everywhere, already examples of e-participation activities, not top-down, not the government asking the citizens, what do you think of us? Because that's the question they always ask. Don't you think we are very well doing what we are doing? But then there are now, and I know of a number of decisions in Flanders that have been overturned by popular protest throughout the media. And not only e-participation, also e-innovation, it's coming to the government. It's, we've now got, and there the whole discussion about open data is becoming very important. Belgium has become famous, except for having not a government for more than one year and doing very well without one. That's a sociological and political experiment which is worth investigating. But also, our public transport company took somebody to court because he was using their timetable to make an application that was very useful. I think we're going to see a lot of examples that way. I don't expect, and I'm a civil servant, I don't expect my government to be very innovative, but I think we'll have to learn to cope with what is happening around us.
I hate to think, Gerrit, as a professional rioter, what you would do today if you were a student with social media instead of just pamphlets.
Well, if I can make a comment, you have no government in Belgium since the longest period, so you have no enemy to fight with, okay? Thank you very much for your very interesting and inspirative talk. Thank you.